Hello and welcome to Deep Thoughts, Shallow Plots.
My name's Erika, and I really like to watch horror movies.
My name's Katy, and I really like to overanalyze things. What are we overanalyzing today, Erika?
Today, we are overanalyzing the 1974 proto-slasher Christmas classic, Black Christmas. Katy, do you want to give us just like a quick overview of what this movie's about before we jump right in?
Yeah, so this is honestly a pretty straightforward kind of slasher-esque. Mm-hmm. There's a guy in the house killing off sorority sisters. Mm-hmm. The call is coming from inside the house stuff. People are dying.
Yeah, this movie does really play off the urban legend theme that I think we've kind of been discussing in recent episodes.
Yeah, eventually I'm going to do a deep dive into telephones. But today is not this day.
Today's not that day. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so we've got this cast of characters, mostly female cast of characters, very few men.
Yeah. And the men who are there are awful.
They're there,
ineffective, or I don't know. There's like two okay men.
Who's okay?
I was going to say Claire's dad, who's a little bit. But he doesn't do anything in terms of people being offensive in this movie, men being awful. He's just a dad. You know, he's judgy. Yeah. But like
a dad.
Just let him judge.
That other guy, is that Claire's boyfriend?
Yeah, and then Claire's boyfriend was the other boy I was going to say.
Cool.
Claire's boyfriend seems fine.
Other than that.
They did want the ending, I think when it came to America or something, they wanted to change the ending to be less ambiguous and have it be Claire's boyfriend.
Oh.
Which I don't think would have been good.
No. Right, so we've got this cast of characters that, it's taking place in a sorority house, and it's taking place at Christmas, but I would argue that it doesn't need to be taking place during Christmas. It's just taking place during a time when the sorority house is sparsely populated.
Right, and where it's not surprising that somebody isn't around because, well, they're home for the holidays.
Yeah, they went home, they left. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of characters here.
And we also have an interesting subplot going on in this film.
Oh, yeah. I don't even know if it's really a subplot. I think it's
like
a major plot.
Well, yeah, but I would say it's the B plot to the A plot.
Yeah, for sure.
The B plot to the A plot, which is Jess telling her boyfriend that she is getting an abortion, and her boyfriend Peter being just a real baby about it.
Yeah, being a total ass. Yeah.
Yeah.
So our kind of main character, and again, this is a proto-slasher, 1974, same year that Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out, which, is largely considered with inspiring the slasher genre that would really take shape in the 80s and the 90s, 4 years before Halloween as well.
Yeah, and this movie was perhaps an inspiration for it, with it being another holiday slasher.
Probably, yeah. So Jess is kind of, if this is a prototypical slasher, Jess is our prototypical final girl.
Yeah.
But interesting, though, because I think so much of this film has to do with women's sexuality. And and like this shows up for Jess because like she obviously had sex, she got pregnant, right?
Yeah.
And she is, Jess is like, I think, a very calm and collected young woman.
She is very
like
rational.
Shit starts to go down, her friends start to go missing, and she is like keeping it under control, right? And she is also like, she is telling Peter, her boyfriend, whose pregnancy we assume he had a hand in, right?
Yeah.
She's very calm and collected, and she's just, she talks to Peter like he's an adult and she's an adult.
Right. And she makes it clear, like, she has thought about this.
Yep.
She's considered her options. This is the option she is going with.
Yep.
And I am here informing you of this, not asking for opinions.
Yeah.
And he's like calling her selfish, like, don't you ever consider anybody but yourself? And then he's like, don't you know how important this afternoon is to me? Talking about a piano recital that he has.
That's right,
it's like,
oh, Peter.
This is what you're bringing up right now?
Yeah.
And then, of course, when that piano recital doesn't go well, this fucking asshole busts up the piano.
Right.
I'm like, is that the school's piano?
But who cares whose piano it is? Pianos are expensive.
Yeah. What are you doing,
but
dickhead?
Do we actually get that? Do we find out that the piano recital doesn't go well?
Well, we see that he's like kind of nervous and sweaty, and the people watching just sort of seem stone-faced and like they aren't really enjoying it.
I mean, honestly, as someone who studied music before, like, it's pretty par for the course.
I think we're supposed to think that it didn't go well in terms of like movie representation of it. Also because later when he's like, we can just get married, we'll have the baby, we'll get married, I'm quitting the conservatory. I'm like, of course you're saying you're quitting the conservatory because you had a fucking bad day at your recital. This isn't actually about Jess, and this is about you taking control of something.
Right. And that really is, I think, like the biggest theme of this entire movie is women trying to exercise independence and bodily autonomy in their, especially in their sexuality. And every system around them, the system of law enforcement, right, predominantly male, the system of the school they're going to, and like the students around them are like doing whatever they can explicitly or implicitly to keep these women from being able to do that.
Yeah.
And I think Peter is just a really, really great example of that, of like, in general, the men wanting to control the lives of the women around them, right? Like, and again, Jess, like, she does it so well. She says, like, do you remember when we met, you know? And she's like, you told me about your dreams and what you wanted to do, and I told you about my dreams and what I wanted to do. And it's just like, yeah, what else, Jess? Yeah. And she's like, I still want to do those things. Just because your plans have changed doesn't mean my plans have changed.
Yeah,
right?
she's like, okay, so bye, bitch. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah,
like, my plans are still my plans.
And Peter says, like, yeah, oh gosh, I wish I'd written down some of the things he says. Yeah, he calls her selfish. He says, yeah, you're not thinking about anybody else besides yourself. And I was like, well, first of all, she's a college student. So, like, if ever there's a time to be selfish and only think about yourself.
Well, yeah. There's also, especially the things he says when he then comes to talk to her some more about it at I think it's at the sorority house, and they're in front of the Christmas tree.
Oh yeah.
And he starts calling her a bitch.
Yes.
And he starts breaking the ornaments and like getting really big, you know, that way that men do where they use their size just to be like intimidating.
Yeah.
You know, and like that's when he says that she's murdering our baby.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Ugh,
has that line about like as easy as getting a wart removed or whatever that then the caller repeats to her.
Oh yeah, because there's also that caller, right? And this is I think a thing about this film is that it does end in a very ambiguous fashion, and we also never find out who the psycho killer is.
No,
we know that it's not Peter. And
his eyes are the wrong color.
His eyes, whatever. We know it's not Peter, although I think the cops do try to pin it on Peter, right?
Well, they assume it's Peter, without actually talking to Jess about it.
Or doing any kind of investigation.
They don't search the entire house.
No, they don't
even once they find out the call's coming from inside the house. And they still have bodies missing, so they aren't like, well, maybe some of the bodies are still in this house. We should look. No, we're going to leave this traumatized woman alone.
Who just killed her shitty boyfriend.
Yeah, who maybe was a murderer, maybe not. Yeah. Either way, she's fucking traumatized. And the doctor's like, I know what's good for her. We're just going to sedate her and leave her alone with like one cop outside.
Basically. Yeah.
The way that Jess is just let down by so many men.
Just over and over and over, yeah. So it's interesting because this film is from 1974. And, of course, as we know, this movie is actually a Canadian film.
Yes.
It takes place in Canada. It technically does take place in Canada. It was filmed in Canada. So it's just really interesting. Like, I think the timeliness of this film is pressing. Because the year before, in 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court rules to protect the right to abortion access in Roe versus Wade. But, of course, that was in the United States, although it does seem like Canada's on a pretty similar trajectory. I guess by 1968, the Canadian federal government passes the Criminal Law Amendment Act that helps legalize abortion and contraception. But it's my understanding that that was just in the case of quote unquote therapeutic abortions, which kind of seemed, from the research I did, really just seemed to cover like abortions in the event of like fetal inviability. Is that the word?
Yeah.
If the fetus isn't viable, or if like the health and safety of the mother is in jeopardy because of the pregnancy. So it's just a really interesting little time and place that Jess is deciding to get an abortion.
Yeah. And I think as you pointed out, though, even if it's not quite legal in Canada yet, all of these sorority girls seem to be of a class
Yeah.
Where it wouldn't be so hard to go into, pop over to New York or wherever to get an abortion. I think you're right about that.
Yeah, and it also would have been much easier to access abortion in New York because New York State legalized abortion a couple years before the Roe v. Wade decision. So, probably. Yeah.
And I think even in cases where it was a therapeutic abortion situation, there have been certain doctors who have allowed cases of it being like a psychological health risk. And I think Jess would be a candidate for that.
Right. Well, especially now that the dude who got her pregnant, she murdered him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if that's not a therapeutic reason, then I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Because I mean, especially in 1974, like you wouldn't, want a kid growing up without an intact home.
Oh God, no.
Of course not. No. So Jess is kind of our final girl, and we do sort of like follow her throughout the entirety.
And she has
of the
some
film.
great sweaters. She looks great in yellow.
She does, yeah.
When Peter says "I love you," she responds with "I know." Like everything about her is excellent.
Wow, this is before Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
Wow, well done, Jess.
And it was a very different tone to that "I know."
yes. So Jess is killing it, and she's also just going through a really highly stressful situation. Like we've said, her friends are starting to disappear. Law enforcement is less than helpful.
She's in college.
She's just in college. Yeah, it's a stressful
woman
time
in the
for
70s.
her. And she's keeping it together. I don't think she ever raises her voice. I don't think.
No. And I think the only time when she really
keeps her composure.
I find her and her friendship with Phyllis, really nice. They seem to be the people. Like so many men in this film just like let women down in so many different ways. Yeah. But the women are able to really rely on each other. Like when she hears the caller say those same things that Peter said.
Yeah.
She doesn't tell the cops about it, but she does talk to Phil about it and like get support there. And then Phil talks about how like she's really worried about Claire missing and like gets help from Jess about that. And they're like really supportive of each other.
Especially Phyllis. I feel like Phyllis is not really much of her own character. Like we don't really get to know Phyllis that well. She's just kind of a support.
She is definitely a support. She has some lines. I liked her. I felt like I understood her relationship to Jess. One thing I really like about her is that she never liked Peter, and I'm like, you're right not to.
Is Phyllis the one that gives you the lesbian vibe too?
Yeah.
Was she the one like kind of cuddling up with that other in that beginning scene in the when they're at the party? Phyllis and who else?
I think it's Jess.
And Jess?
I think so. I think they're kind of, I don't know. It took me, I only watched it the one time, and it took me a while to figure out which girl was which.
Who's who, absolutely. Yep. I thought Claire was Jess for a hot minute. Yeah,
definitely took me a while to separate Claire from Jess. But I'm pretty sure at the beginning, Claire is making out with her boyfriend.
Okay.
So I think it was Phil and Jess who were.
Yeah.
And then the other thing Jess does is that when she's told that the call is coming from inside the house, but she knows that Barb and Phil are still in the house somewhere. Yeah. And like it's a good chance they're already dead.
They are. And
they do turn out to be dead, but she still goes in like after she doesn't like give herself to safety.
She does raise her voice. She does yell at them like answer me please if you're there.
Yeah, cuz she's like, all of the cops have let us the fuck down. I'm going to save my friends, and I wish she could have.
I also wish she could have. Yeah. This is true, yeah.
And it just sort of shows that she's not selfish, actually. Peter.
No, actually, honestly, I think, that the decision she's making to terminate that pregnancy is honestly a super smart one.
Yeah.
And
it's not coming from, like, a selfish place or, like, and even if it was, that's fine. But, like, it's just so infuriating to have Peter say that when he is just clearly such a selfish person.
Oh yeah.
And Jess is so clearly not.
So that we also have, I feel like to me the most interesting character to me is Barb.
She is
played by Margot Kidder.
Yeah.
If I'm
it
not
took
mistaken.
me a while in the beginning to sort of, I was like, I know one of these girls is going to be our sort of final girl. Because I'm primed for that.
Of course,
and I was like, I don't know, Barb is interesting, and we're
She is
spending a lot of
interesting.
time with her. What's Barb's deal?
I also feel in a different kind of movie, again, if this was made in like 1984, that Barb would probably be one of the first to die.
Oh yeah,
she technically dies third.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm not quite sure what the body count in this movie is.
Well, and it depends on if we count the little girl Janice.
Oh,
Is that
that's
her
right.
name?
The little girl.
They
yeah.
find her, and I'm unclear on if that was also our same killer.
I thought it was supposed to be.
But they never establish it.
They never establish it, no. But Barb in general is just like, she's a bit of a mess.
She really is.
And I feel like in a different kind of movie, she would be one of the ones to die first.
But instead, there's something
Yeah.
about this movie that really treats these women, like takes them seriously and treats
yeah.
them as full people rather than as like archetypes, as a lot of horror films do, where
Right.
it's like, it sort of acknowledges that like right from the beginning, we have this dynamic where they all are kind of listening to this creepy call, the guy like moaning on the phone, you know, and they think it's just sort of like some pervert calling before all the murders start. And they're all listening. And it seems like mostly it's because Barb is kind of like the cool girl who's like above it and thinks it's kind of funny. And they're all
she's
kind
keeping
of like
him on the phone instead of just hanging
the
up.
fuck up. But you know, you get that dynamic where you all kind of want to like live up to the cool girl in the group.
And she wants to like cuss at him. And be
Yeah.
like, you pig, you know.
And because her whole thing is like acting tough. She's so my favorite type of character where it's like, you know, the bitch with the heart of gold, where she just really acts tough, but has like so much sadness under her.
And her crystal figurine collection.
Yes, which is such, like, yeah, and her asthma.
Yes. Well, maybe if she wasn't constantly smoking. I don't think there's a scene where she doesn't have a cigarette in her
Oh, yeah.
hands.
Only stop smoking to take a drink.
To take a drink. Yeah, she's drinking and smoking pretty consistently throughout this film. And I don't know if part of that is like the fact that it is like a holiday break, you know, like they're at that their holiday party at their
Yeah.
sorority house.
Yeah, they're
and
all drinking a little
They're all
bit.
drinking, yeah. So
There's that.
But then she does end up later. She's drunk and no one else is.
Yeah.
When they're
'Cause I
kind
think
of went
they're-
out looking for Jess or not Jess, excuse me, go out looking for Claire, unsuccessfully.
Yeah, I think there are a few things weighing on her. It does seem like she has this, like, right from the beginning, this, like, contentious relationship with her mom.
Very much so.
Where she thought her and her mom were going to do something and, like, plans got changed on her.
Yeah.
And she's, like, feeling upset about that. And then she also has this really revealing line later where she is drunk and sad and, like, kind of trying to hide it. Where she talks about how she feels guilty because during, like, when she's told to hang up the phone, Claire's the one who's mostly upset about it.
Yeah.
And Barb calls Claire a professional virgin and like kind of drives her away. She's
Yes.
like, whatever, I'm gone. I'm going to go pack.
Yeah.
And so Barb feels like responsible for Claire being missing.
Because that was kind of the last time anyone saw Claire.
Yeah. So Barb's like, I'm the one who drove her away.
Yeah.
It's my fault if she shows up dead. And it's just like, yeah, maybe you would drink a bunch.
Yeah, definitely see the tumultuous relationship with her mom, because like in such a clear, concise way too. Just like with the phone call, you know, what did she say? Did she call her mommy?
I don't remember.
Something like that. I don't know. And she says, something about, I've had a couple, like, mentioning how much she's drinking or whatever, you know? Yeah, so we can tell that there's that tumultuous relationship with her mom for sure. And it just in general, I think, maybe as part of like her kind of cool girl
Tough
vibe is that she also says, or maybe also the influence of the alcohol, it's hard to say, that she says a lot of like really inflammatory things, like calling Claire a professional virgin, right? And it's just like, first of all, why does it matter? You know, and it's so interesting because like, you know, this is happening in the mid 70s. We're like kind of smack dab in the middle of second wave feminism. And so it's just like, you know, a big part of the push in second wave feminism was like sexual liberation. And so it's like, Barb, you're not being a very good feminist right now, you know, like,
Well,
if
Claire's not being sexually liberated.
I guess, but like if Claire doesn't want to have sex, if she just wants to make out with her boyfriend, then like that's her choice. The whole
Right.
point is choice, right?
No, the whole point was being sexually liberated, which is different.
Right. And so it's interesting that there is that she's kind of does have this sexual liberation thing, because she also has probably the most inflammatory line of the entire film.
Oh, yeah.
When Claire, she's talking with Claire, they're talking with everybody. Everybody's around the house because this is right after they got a call from the Mona.
Yes.
Is that how? That's what Jules Not Jules. Who's Jules? Jules is no one. Claire.
Jess.
Jess
is the one who answers the phone first. And she's the one who has the weirdest accent.
She has an interesting accent because that actress is British and Argentine.
Yeah.
So that's definitely an interesting combination there. That's, it's almost kind of like a East Coast accent.
Yeah.
The Mona.
It's the Mona.
Anyway, which gets everybody's attention. And I think it's Claire or Jess who's like, yeah, but I'm freaked out about this because, like, didn't you hear that, you know, there was like one of the townies was like raped in the park or something. And Barb just like so matter of fact, straight face is just like, you can't rape a townie, right? So even though we're kind of in the middle of this like second wave feminism, sexual liberation, like the women, not just Barb, all of the women in this movie still have like quite a bit to learn and understand about sexual liberation.
Well, they're also all college kids.
They're college kids in the 70s. So yeah, like we've mentioned, like odds are that they probably have access to money. They probably have money. They're probably upper class. I mean, I know that college was way less expensive in the 70s, but, you know, also,
I don't know actually about the situation in Canada.
I don't know about the situation in Canada either. It seemed honestly all pretty similar. And yeah, I think especially in order to like educate, to send your daughter to college, like you probably have to have a little bit of extra money. You know, there might be like some savings accounts to send your boy to college, but your daughter, I don't know. I don't know if a lot of families in the 70s were really thinking about that.
Yeah.
You know? But I actually had a question about Barb. I was wondering if you could help me answer. Because she's the one who, when they go to the cops to say that Claire's missing, she gives them that joke number. Remember? And she does that, well, because it's funny, right?
Yeah.
She says something about...
ACAB.
Because it says something... Well, and this is, honestly, has something to do with the history of telephones I don't fully understand, which is like...
Especially since it's a Canadian phone.
It's a Canadian phone, yeah.
Who knows what they do?
She said when the cop asked for the number or like the line, she says fellatio.
And that somehow works.
That somehow works. Yeah, I don't fully understand.
Yeah, she's like, it's a new area. FEL or something.
Yeah.
Like that. I don't know what that means.
What I don't understand is like why she gives that cop the joke number. Doesn't she want the cop to call them back?
Because at that point, they've gone in because Claire's missing.
Claire's missing, yeah. So Jess, Barb, and Claire's boyfriend go to the cops, right?
Is that when Claire's dad is there too?
I don't remember if
they
Claire's
go to the
dad
cop
is there.
they go to the cops first with the dad, and then later they come back again with the boyfriend.
Right.
And I don't think Barb's there the second time. I think she's
there the first time. Yeah, to give that wrong number.
Yeah.
But I just don't understand why she does that.
Drunk, and she doesn't. I think part of it is maybe that she either, like the cops, doesn't think it's a big deal and Claire will turn up, or knows that the cops don't think it's a big deal and won't actually do anything. And won't do anything
anyway.
I don't know. She just seems sort of like over it all.
Yeah.
In a way that might just be like drunkenness. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It is an interesting thing that she does there.
Yeah. I was like, why do you do that? I mean, yeah, it's funny. And it's also really funny that cop doesn't know what fellatio is. And it's like, come on, man. Talk about not sexually liberated. Yeah, interesting choice. And she dies third, right?
Yeah. Maybe. Depending on who else is victim.
Right. Okay, so yeah, let me
the house she dies
in
third.
the house of the
confirmed kills.
The confirmed kills, yes. Of the psycho killer in the sorority house, she's third, right?
Yeah.
And she gets stabbed to death with her, is it crystal? Is it glass? What's the...
Yeah, it's like a glass unicorn.
A glass unicorn figurine.
It made me feel very The Glass Menagerie.
Uh-huh.
Tennessee Williams.
I mean, yeah, but I don't...
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's just a play. It was just little figurines that one would collect because they were pretty or whatever and fragile and beautiful,
which is nice and kind of like,
and I don't think too expensive,
No, probably not.
So you can have a bunch of them.
Yeah, and definitely like makes Barb a lot more like 3-dimensional as a character.
Right. Yeah, because there's that interesting also dichotomy that we get in several ways between Barb and Claire.
Yeah,
I think you referred to them as like two sides of the same coin.
Definitely. Yeah,
and we see that in their rooms versus their like outward personas.
Right.
Where like Barb is this kind of brash.
That's true.
Loudmouth, this kind of sexually liberated or just maybe crude person. But her room is like really clean and neat and just has these like kind of childish toys and things, And then we see Claire's room, the quote unquote professional virgin.
Yeah.
And she has some interesting decor.
Yeah, she's got like free love posters on the wall and
picture of her boyfriend.
Of course. Framed, obviously.
Yes, by her bed. But yeah, there's like, all these like kind of naked pictures that like Miss Mac tries to hide from Claire's dad.
Right. I was like, you're in her room, dude. Like, what do you want?
Yeah, it just sort of looks like a college dorm. Like, I don't know. But
from the 70s, yeah.
Yeah, but it does make them all feel... it's a good way of like rounding these characters out so they aren't just like the way that you see in a lot of horror films where they're just sort of there to be killed. So it doesn't really matter who they are as people. Like, they really spend time with these people, like establishing that they're more than just one thing.
Right. Yeah. And so Claire does die first. And so, but here's my question. Is she a virgin?
We don't know.
We don't know.
We do know from the way that all of the other girls are talking, and I don't think they have reason to like be wrong about this, that Claire at the very least like only has her boyfriend and isn't like out on the town with a bunch of different men.
Yeah.
You know, so like if she isn't a virgin, it's in this like very, I don't know, monogamous, safe way, you know, where they seem to have like this really love it. Like her boyfriend seems to genuinely really care about her and love her. Like they seem to have like a good relationship.
But, and it's interesting because, you know, Barb does call her a professional virgin, right? And she dies first, which is, again, if this was made in 84 instead of 74, Claire probably would have been like a little closer to the final girl.
Yeah.
You know, having the virgin, or at least someone who we are referring to as the virgin die first is pretty interesting. And then her dad comes to pick her up. Right, because you know it's the holiday season and she's supposed to be going home for the holidays. And her dad just seems to have like a lot of control over her life, or at least likes to pretend that he does. Maybe because he mentions paying for her tuition, right?
Oh, well.
He's like, "Well, I'm not paying for my daughter to come here to hook up with men and whatever, you know." Whatever he says, maybe drinking or, you know, like normal college things, right? And so I wonder if that like makes him feel like he has the right to control her life because he's paying her tuition.
I mean, I think that certain parents do feel that way.
Yeah. I mean, like while she does seem to be like trying to gain her independence and she's leaving home to go to college, you know? But it is kind of unfortunate because we do get to see Claire's room, but like we don't actually get much of Claire.
No, she dies really
as a
quickly.
person. She dies pretty early. So like it's unfortunate, but I think also really apt for this movie that we get to know Claire best through her father.
Yeah. I mean, but I think we also do get to know her through her friends and through her boyfriend. Like I think something that's really cool about this movie that you don't see in a lot of slashers is that they really take care with the victims and they really point out like people are looking for Claire. They
true.
care about her.
Yeah.
Like she is missing and like the whole town is looking for her really. And Janice, but even after they find little Janice's body, they still are marching around the town looking and trying to find the killer and stuff.
Yeah, they look for Claire up until the end,
and fucking fail
until everybody else is dead and Jess is basically incapacitated. Yeah, and then and
the cops are like, "Okay, we're done here."
Yep, it's Christmas, or is it supposed to be Christmas on that day? Or I don't know.
No, and actually, did you catch? Speaking of when the townies are going around like helping to try to find the, you know, whoever did this or trying to find signs of Claire, whatever. Yeah. And they like knock on the sorority house door and it's like just Jess and Phyllis. And when they see them through the window, Phyllis says, "I'd rather face the killer."
Oh,
and I'm just like,
townies.
Like townies?
Phyllis.
Who are like going around trying to like
help you?
Yes. Like, what is that?
Oh, Phyllis.
To say nothing of the fact that like when we first see Janice's mom trying to get the cops' attention about little Janice missing, and of course the cops are like, "Well, you know, she's 13. She probably just wandered off. Don't worry about it. She'll be back." And her mom's like, "She doesn't do that.
Yeah.
That's not." And then like these college kids barge in with their own thing. I think that's when Claire's boyfriend comes in and is like, "What are we doing about Claire?" Yeah. And like little Janice gets forgotten. And like, why the hell is their search party the same search party? These are two different missing people.
Right. And it's
like weird.
And they're looking in the park where Janice went missing.
Yeah.
And it's just like, Claire wasn't in the park though. What are we doing? What are we doing?
It's so, I mean, the cops suck. But also just like the dynamics between the townies and the college kids is like so weird.
And again, it is like this weird class thing. Cause again, I've said it before and I'm going to keep saying it throughout like the entirety of our episode here, is that especially I think with Barb and Jess, and of course, like that reference or that line that Phyllis has about I'd rather face the killer than townies. I feel like the characters in this, especially the sorority girls in this movie, are just such like perfect textbook second wave feminists, right? They care about liberation and freedom from like male enforced structures, but they're like really blind to really to now us and our third wave feminism, whatever's happening right now, are really blind to what is like to us in the 21st century really obvious. And like, what about women of color? What about queer women? What about lower class women or these townies? Right. And so like, it's interesting. So like these characters like Barb, you know, and Phil, like with these comments, like they're kind of like continuing to enforce patriarchy when they say things like this, but like I don't think they really realize it or have the skills or experiences to like know what they're doing and like how to change it.
No,
I think
they haven't established intersectionalism.
They just need to age another 20 years. You know. So yeah, it's just like this is like second wave feminism for like in every for the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is second wave feminism. No bra burning though. Oh, it's my understanding that never actually happened.
No.
So yeah, like this interesting like disconnect between like, oh, we're concerned for Claire's safety, like this woman who's one of us, you know, like a probably pretty well off class wise.
Yeah. I mean, her dad certainly didn't look like a laborer.
No. A person who can afford, a woman who can afford to go to college in the 70s, right? It's just like, oh, well, we're worried about her. And then when like there are other things to be worried about that like they should also care about, they're like, yeah, but that doesn't actually.
Yeah.
I don't care about that.
Yeah.
I don't care about a missy townie girl. And it's like, why don't you care about a missy townie girl though? Just a really interesting disconnect. Yeah.
Especially since literally those two things could be related.
Yes.
Like literally in this instance, those could have been the same person killing this little Janice girl.
They are interconnected.
Yeah.
Yes. And then we also, there's another character we haven't really talked about yet, which is Mrs. Mack.
I wasn't really sure as a viewer of this film.
Yes.
If we were supposed to like... The whole dynamic between her and Claire's dad.
Yeah.
I was like, whose side are we supposed to be on? Like, are we supposed to think she's really irresponsible and like leading these girls to immorality?
I'll tell you, I'm on neither of their sides.
Right. But like, I couldn't get what dynamic the film wanted from us.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I know.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally, I think all of Claire's dad's worries are like stupid.
Yeah.
Because like everything he's worried about are not actually the actual issues right now, which is, you know.
Yeah, so Mrs. Mack is really, she's like the house mother, right?
Yeah.
And
the girls seem to really like.
They do seem to like her, and she seems sort of ambivalent about them.
She does seem to care about finding her cat more than a lot of other things. Is that her cat or Claire's cat?
I just thought it was the sorority cat.
It's the house cat.
It's the house cat, yeah.
Yeah.
She's very concerned with the cat, and then like continues to call the cat like a bastard or something like that, which I love. Oh yeah, so like I feel like one of the main things we're supposed to know about Mrs. Mack is that she loves sherry.
Yeah.
And she's got bottles hidden all over the house, like
it. For some reason. And I'm like, this is your private room. Like, just have your bottle.
Yeah, right.
Like, you don't need it hidden in a fake book.
And she's got she's got these pretty manageable little like pints or something.
Yeah.
Like they're not huge bottles. They're not like half gallons or fifths, you know. It's like, you just keep that in your purse, Mrs. Mack.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like, just
why are you being so weird about this?
Yeah, why are you being so weird about this? It's almost like somebody who helped make this movie just like did some research on like typical alcoholic behavior, and like hiding bottles was one of them.
Yeah.
And like Mrs. Mack does that.
But it's like, I don't think in this house she would have had to do that.
No, definitely not.
Like, who is looking up on Mrs. Mack and her drinking?
Exactly.
You know, like, sure, maybe people are going to check in on Barb and her drinking and have things to say. Like, her mom is asking about it.
Yeah.
And, like, her friends are like, let's put Barb to bed. She's had too much.
She's drunk, yeah.
Like, that makes sense. But I don't think anybody's like, Mrs. Mack. Woo boy.
Yeah.
Like, nah, she's a woman who's just sort of independent, living her own life. Have your bottles.
Yeah, who cares? Yeah, she's the house mother.
I mean, is there a chance that to keep their sorority house, there are some sort of inspections that happen?
Maybe.
That she is worried about? Like, because that's all I can think of.
But then she's also keeping a bottle in, like, the top of the toilet in, like, the tank. And it's like, that's just unhygienic, Mrs. Mack. Come on. Yeah, because in general, I wonder if she's just like, I want to give Mrs. Mack the benefit of the doubt and say that it's been a long term for her so far, and she just really needs this break. Yeah.
And she was ready to go. She had her taxi.
She does seem just to have a general disregard for these girls that, like, it is her job to look over.
But I don't know. Is her time up? When is she done? When is her break start?
Exactly.
Is this no longer her job?
Yeah, right.
When she like break starts, I might be here, but I'm not here.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and she like I think Mrs. Mack is a little bit more because she's older, right?
Yeah.
She strikes me more as like a first wave feminist, right? You know, because like she does kind of slut shame these girls for like trying to be sexually liberated, right?
Yeah.
And what does she say about like these girls would hump the Eiffel Tower if they could get up there?
Yeah.
Something like that. And I was like, and why does that matter to you, Mrs. Mack? Just let it, you know.
Though she also does like try to protect their image in a certain way, like try to keep Claire's dad from seeing all of Claire's stuff and things, you know, like.
Right. Because Claire's dad seems to like put that on Mrs. Mack. Like, aren't you supposed to be looking after my kid?
That's true. It does become like self-preservation for her.
Yeah, and she's just like, yeah, she kind of gets defensive about it, right? Yeah. And so Mrs. Mack dies second.
Yeah.
And this actually gets me because she goes up to the attic to look for the cat, right?
Poor cat.
Oh, and the cat lives.
Yeah, no,
the cat
cat's
makes
fine.
it. Yeah, good stuff.
For now, because some of the things that the dude on the phone talks about is like animals.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there are a few times when animals come up and I'm just like,
Uh-oh, not the cat, though.
Once he runs out of human victims, I'm concerned about this cat.
Yeah, that's when the cat's gonna get the fuck out of Dodge, though. The cat's gonna know. And,
yeah.
So she dies second, and she goes up to the attic
Just to find the cat.
just because she thinks the cat's up there,
yeah.
which is valid. And then she sees Claire, like very ominous in the rocking chair, like right at the window of the attic. Like if anyone just looked in the window.
But I mean, it's up above. How would you get up there?
And it's dark. Like, okay, whatever. But still, like, holy crap. It's like
there's
it's literally right there.
an attic up there.
And no one looks at it. No one looks in it.
Cops.
But so she goes up to the attic to try and find the cat. She sees Claire. She freaks out. But then the psycho killer's there and gets her. And like she's kind of half out of the attic, and she gets dragged up into the attic. And one of her shoes falls off.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if we're supposed to believe that the psycho killer like takes care of that shoe, or if one of Mrs. Mack's shoes is strewn about the house.
And nobody fucking notices it
no one
or does anything about it.
No one knows where she went. Or, well, again, they're like, hey, she's like, hey, if I'm not here when you're back,
I'm gone.
I went to my sister's for Christmas, right?
Yeah. My cab's going to be here any second.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting but then again, like, but then there's just a shoe, right?
Yeah.
Like, would they recognize it as Mrs. Mack's shoe? Like,
well, I'm sure they would recognize it as not any of theirs.
Their shoes. And just like a pair of shoes, sure, okay.
Sure, maybe she just, left them.
But one shoe?
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
But whatever.
That seems
We're not going to investigate that further.
Again, seems like something that the cops really should have been looking into. But let's talk about that in a second.
I do think it's interesting how she gets killed.
Mrs.
I'm not exactly
Mack?
sure what that is in there.
Yeah,
some
it's
sort
like
of pulley system.
Yeah, some weird
with, like,
1970s technology that we don't need anymore or something. I don't know.
Has a hook on it and like a pulley, and he just sort of like swings a hook in her face or whatever.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
But I just find him interesting. Another way where he's like really different than a lot of like what we think of now as psycho killers.
Right.
Is he's very like opportunistic. Mm-hmm. Like he just kind of suffocates Claire with a bag that's there.
Yep.
And like, he gets Mrs. Mack with that. Mm-hmm. He kills Barb with her own glass unicorn.
Right.
We don't see how he kills Phyllis, but
That's true, but he kills Phyllis, yeah.
like it's all very just sort of what he has at hand.
Right. Which shows how like I think shows the impulsivity of this psycho killer.
Yeah.
And I do really think I in my notes I wrote this psycho killer really puts the psycho in psycho killer.
Right, in a way that makes me a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure.
Like we're definitely dealing with some sort of like literally the movie Psycho, like split personality type, talking in other voices thing.
Yeah.
That I'm like not really sure what the movie's going for.
Yeah.
And like the movie has zero interest in explaining what exactly his deal is, which I like and don't like in different measures.
Right, yeah. And it's interesting because he's like, because as part of the phone call. And so this is the thing about the phone calls, right? Is that it's established that they deal with these obscene phone calls. They've dealt with them previous to this instance.
Yes.
That's why Jess says, it's the Mona.
Yeah.
So was it always that psycho killer?
I wonder about that too.
I just think that obscene...
Especially since other than that first call, he doesn't do a lot of like that same sexual obscene talk and the moaning.
Yeah.
Only the first call is like that.
Right. I also think that this is just something that is just part of these women's daily
I think that's just
lived
part of living in a
experience.
sorority house is that you're going to get
Obscene phone
various
calls.
different, and they're all the Mona.
Yeah.
Because they're all moaning.
But yeah, who knows?
I don't know. Yeah.
I actually do really like that we never actually see or know who the killer
Yeah,
is.
the only thing I don't like
it.
about it is that it makes the villain, like there's a way it can be read where the villain is just sort of like mental health problems.
Sure.
You know?
Or the patriarchy.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
On the other hand, why I do like it.
Yes.
It's that it's nice that we can sort of like, I don't know. We'll probably talk about that more when we talk about misogyny in general, where he is just sort of like a shadowy figure of misogyny, you know? And he's also like, it makes it an opportunity that we don't get a lot in horror films where the focus is so much on like who the slasher is and what his deal is and like following his point of view and stuff. Where it's like, no, this story is like, it's focused on the women and like what their lives are. And we like see their lives outside of this house and like everything they're doing. And it's like, there's no way to create like this cult around this killer. Like there's no way to have Halloween costumes of the Mona,
the dude from Black Christmas.
Like, and like I think that's cool because like fuck this guy.
Yeah.
He's a fucking murderer and a piece of shit. So like we shouldn't have that. But it's interesting.
Yeah, I think you're totally right that like the focus is not on this psycho killer, but like I think literally the opening scene is from his perspective he creeps into the house, right?
Yeah.
And so like we as the audience see these sorority girls in peril like literally from scene one, right? And then again we've established that the obscene phone calls are just something that these women experience, right? And so we do, while we don't know who the psycho killer is or what they look like, we do spend a lot of time in the perspective of the psycho killer. So that kind of, I think, also makes us like, as this happens so much with like horror movies and horror audiences, is like we are the voyeurs,
Right? Yeah.
right. Like
that classic
we
thing.
are complicit in this psycho killing, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I completely understand what you're saying about like how a little bit frustrating it is that we don't know who the killer is, who they are, you know, what their motivation is really. But I think also there's a lot of, to me, it doesn't really matter.
Well, no, I'm not frustrated by it because we don't know. I actually love that about it.
Yeah.
Because I don't fucking care about him.
I don't
The
care,
only thing that bothers me is because the things that we do know about him is that he's clearly mentally unstable.
Right.
And like the villainization of mental illness.
Yeah, there is like that one call in the middle of the calls where he does say like, please stop me.
Yeah. The original title for the movie. Was Stop
Is
Me.
it Stop Me or Please Stop Me?
I think it was just Stop Me.
Just Stop Me, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I just like, we're getting into it. We're almost there. And like, I just can't wait for you to just go off on like explicitly how incompetent law enforcement is.
Yeah.
Right?
No, we're getting there. We're getting there. Oh, I'm warming up.
Yeah. Because it's like, it's like, okay, so you obviously don't give a fuck about these young women.
Yeah.
Right. But like, and then they're having a hell of a time tracing the call, whatever. But it's like, and even like, does anyone like Jess who gets the call when the psycho killer is like, please help me, please stop me, I can't stop myself, right?
Yeah.
Like, does she relay that to law enforcement?
Well, I mean, because they're listening in. They
for
hear
that
it.
call. Did they hear that for that
Oh,
call?
I don't remember.
Because he calls
There's so
like
many goddamn
5
calls.
times before they
God.
trace the call.
Well,
yeah.
it takes so long for Jess to even bring it up, but I'm like, yeah, because when she does finally bring it up, the cop's first response is, well, we got a lot going on. Don't really have time for prank calls.
Yeah.
Like, the only reason they pay attention is because they already have, like, missing women from that house. Otherwise, they would not have given a fuck about these calls.
Yeah. And then we also get, like, it's my understanding that this is a bigger focus in the 2006 remake of this film, because like we don't really know, like we kind of give the psycho killer the name Billy because he's always talking about Billy and Agnes.
Yeah. You left Billy alone with baby Agnes.
Yeah. And so we like are supposed to think that something's happened, right? And so that makes me think that like the psycho killer is meant to be Billy.
Yeah.
Like maybe literally or figuratively, you know?
Right, yeah, and that he did something to a little sister or something.
Yeah, and then that's the thing is just like, what did he do? Did he like hurt her?
Right.
Is this like incestuous? Like what?
And it's like,
what did he do?
and the idea I think in the later ones is like he's back at this sorority house because it was like the house where he grew up and like murdered his family or something like that. But like we don't know in this movie.
Yeah, it's true. It's very ambiguous.
Like we don't even know. This is a weird thing to say, but we don't even know if he's like enjoying killing these women.
It almost kind of seems like it is like
He's not.
Yeah, it's impulsive and he's not like.
I mean, the one time he has that freak out in the attic and starts breaking things.
That's right.
I don't know if that's because he's freaking out because he like can't stop. It's like right after he kills Mrs. Mack.
Yeah.
And it's like he freaks out about it in this weird way. And then it does seem like often after he kills somebody, that's when he does a call, like he's trying to reach out. And like, I don't know. It's hard to tell like what his motive is, but like also what kind of motive do you have for just randomly killing a bunch of people? You know, like what motive is there?
Yeah.
Other than something has gone wrong in your life and you need help.
And you need help. Yeah. And the thing about when someone needs help like that, it's, I think, hard for somebody to know how to ask for that help.
Yeah.
Or even really understanding what kind of help they need.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
I mean, he's in no position really to be able to even like talk to people.
No.
He just seems to be sort of like reliving his own past, maybe?
Yeah. Which seems like also traumatic, you know?
Right. Yeah. Because he also talks about like he calls Barb Agnes before he kills her.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like he's not even killing these women. He's like killing things from his past.
And he's like, he's not in reality.
Yeah.
No.
And so then that does make it kind of interesting. Yeah. How impulsive it is and how he
Yeah.
just uses things. And the one that stands out to me actually
Yeah.
is, are we supposed to think he's the one who went outside and slit that cop's throat?
Oh.
I mean, I don't know who else would have.
Who else would have?
But it seems so unlike his MO.
I know, right? He's all over the place.
Like, what's he doing out there?
And then he like probably killed that little
little
girl,
girl?
Janice. And I was like, what?
was that just because it happened on the way to getting to the house?
Are we also supposed to believe that like he's also the one who like attempted to rape that townie?
Oh, maybe.
Like, what is it? Just all the crime in this
It's
college
all
town? Just
Billy.
this?
It's all the Mona. But that's the thing. They're all the Mona. It could
They
be
are,
any
yes.
of them. We're going to talk about that more because, like, oh boy, Peter is also
The
basically the Mona.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been talking about it. So let's actually talk about it. Let's talk about the incompetence of law enforcement.
Okay.
In this movie.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think the main things that we've already talked about the really dumb small things. Well, not small, big things.
Really
the
big,
dumb
big
things
stuff.
that they've done
Yeah.
where they're just sort of like, I mean, they're like unprofessional.
Yeah.
They're like laughing at this fellatio stuff when it's like, you need these girls like number.
Yeah.
This is a serious issue.
Yeah.
And like just not taking things seriously. No. They get sidetracked by things all the time. Like at one point he's like gonna start helping with something and then they get a call about one of their own getting shot for trespassing. And they like get derailed by that.
Are you talking about Lieutenant Fuller?
Yeah.
He's kind of the main cop guy.
Who I think we're supposed to like. He's supposed to be like the one good cop.
Is he?
Because he's the one who listens to them. But
Does
like,
he though?
But like, does he?
Yeah.
And I don't remember which cop it is, but the things that really get me are like their reason for not listening.
Yeah.
One cop is like, 90% of girls who go missing are at some cabin with their boyfriends.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I would love to see the stats on that, sir.
Cite your source.
Cite your sources.
Yeah.
Also, it doesn't matter why somebody is missing.
They're missing.
It's your job to look for them.
Yeah.
And I also looked this up, and there is no waiting period for like reporting somebody missing in
there's
Canada.
not. Yeah.
Like, there isn't.
Yeah.
So like, look for this girl.
Yeah. The fact that a couple of her friends, her boyfriend and her dad, are like, hey, she's definitely missing.
This is not normal behavior for her.
Yes.
They keep talking about how like the cops didn't take it seriously. No. And Jess is like, yeah, I don't know why. They like think she's shacked up somewhere and keeps having to be like, but that's not who she is.
Yeah.
Like Chris comes in, like her boyfriend, Chris, and is like, that's not who she is.
Yeah. If she was shacked up, it would be with him. He's right here.
He was like playing hockey or something.
Yeah.
Like, come on. And it's like, and it's the same thing when our little 13-year-old Janice goes missing, where it's the same thing. It's like, well, she's just coming home late. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's your job.
It's like these cops are like allergic to doing their job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't really, because they do say like, oh, well, we're really busy. Like, they're just kind of hanging around.
I know.
They have
a lot of time to like make jokes and
they're not doing anything.
They're not.
It doesn't look
no,
like
it seems like this is their big case that they should be focused on. But,
absolutely.
Right. And then like, and then also when they finally do something, we're just going to look for these two girls using the same search party, even though
in a location only one of them was known to be in.
But that makes sense. That's fine and not a waste of our resource. No, and it's just like throughout.
Yes.
These sorority sisters are doing what like we're told people are supposed to do.
Yeah.
Where it's like they are reaching out for help. Yeah. They are asking for help and they're just ignored. Mm-hmm. And I did find this one article on Morbidly Beautiful called The Radical Legacy of Black Christmas.
Oh,
that had a lot of the same ACAP feelings that I had about it. And like even went farther and like listed a number of instances where in real life, women have alerted police to like their impending danger.
Yeah.
And they were ignored, and then like subsequently they were fucking murdered, and cops were like had the information and did nothing.
I think that it's my understanding that like the rationale is, well, a law hasn't been broken yet.
Right. No, and then that's what made me think of, do you know, sometimes I'm a bit of a like law freak. There's Town of Castle Rock v. Gonzalez, a Supreme Court case.
Oh, okay.
From late 90s, early thousands,
okay,
something like that. Yeah, early thousands. It's a case where a woman had a restraining order against her ex-husband, protecting her and her kids from said ex-husband. Ex-husband kidnaps the children, which is what most kidnappings are, right? Non-custodial parents.
Non-custodial parents.
She goes she calls the cops multiple times. She goes to them. And it's a horrible case where the kids end up dying. They end up getting murdered. And the Supreme Court fucking rules that this woman has no right to like sue the police force or anything like that because they were never mandated to enforce the restraining order. So it's like, then what even is a fucking restraining order if it doesn't have to be enforced? What's the fucking point of it? Where it's like that same kind of rationale of like so it's like even if a crime is being committed, they still aren't going to do anything about it. So then it's like, well, then what are they doing? What are they fucking there for? Yeah. And like, what are they there for in this movie?
Because they're certainly not there to provide mental health supports for the psycho killer.
No.
Definitely
They're not there to do a thorough search of the house.
No. Oh my gosh. No. So, and that's the other thing is like at the end of the film, Jess has killed Peter because she was scared and thought it was him, but it ends up not being him.
I do really love actually what this film does where, I mean, it does sort of set Peter up as a good red herring.
Sure does.
In various ways by giving them like the same lines.
Yes.
And then when he is talking through like the window into the garage, before he fucking breaks the window and goes in, you fucking freak.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course she's fucking terrified of you.
Of course, yeah.
But the way his voice distorts, it like sounds like
the
phone calls, it like sounds weird and phone call-y. It's like, it's well done. It's well done.
Yeah, but like, so at the end of the film, again, they have not searched this house.
No.
Which really does seem like, I think they've searched within the house, but they sure as shit haven't checked the attic, which seems pretty common procedure sweep the entire house.
And they haven't even talked to Jess because instead they're going to sedate her and let her rest,
Right,
which they think is for her own good, I guess.
And they're letting her rest like in her room in the sorority house where like they know for a fact people have just been murdered.
Where she just saw her friends like murdered, their bodies like displayed on their beds.
But I think they're just like, it was Peter.
Case closed.
Dust off hands.
Don't worry about her trauma.
Yeah.
Don't worry about any of it. Don't worry about getting a statement from her about what happened. They don't even have confirmation that she was the one who killed Peter.
Right.
Because they find her unconscious.
Yes.
Like she faints or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like kind of unclear.
Yeah.
So it's like, for all they know, the psycho killer killed Peter.
And they just straight up leave her in that house
with
alone,
a single cop outside,
and like we see the psycho killer like slink back up into the attic and just wait for their next move, you know?
Yeah, and then we get the phone call, the phone's ringing,
and nobody answers
it. That's the last thing we have is the phone ringing,
and nobody answers it,
and so we're left being like, for all we know, Jess is fucking dead.
Yeah, her fate is very uncertain.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting way of playing the final girl, really, in like one of the earliest instances of a final girl. Yeah.
Where we really don't know.
Right.
And I think what this really goes back to is that like the way cops treat people depends on who those people are.
Absolutely.
And it's like we see that in how they treat the townies versus how they treat the college kids, where they do sort of brush aside Janice's mom when the college kids come in, you know. Mm-hmm. But it's also in like how they treat women versus how they treat men.
Yeah.
And how they like listen to each other and don't listen to these women who are actually going through this and have actual information about this.
Yep.
And just like make these assumptions about who these girls are and what's going on with them. And it really is just like another situation where like it all comes down to that goddamn misogyny, man.
Truly. Yeah. And like, that's the thing. It's just like, because who are cops? Cops are men.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of white guys in this movie.
And again, like the second wave feminism and like the backlash against it of just like, oh, you know, the girls these days,
they're just harlots.
Yeah, they just want their sexual liberation. They're burning their bras all over the place. And
of course they're just shacking up with some boy.
Yeah.
Who cares that their friends think that would be wildly out of character for her?
Yeah. Trust me, I'm a cop. I know what your friend is like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is just so gross.
It is really gross, yeah.
And very accurate to real life.
Yeah. I mean, you know, where's the lie? Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think this just leads us really well into this really great I found this really great article by Ashley Manu, and that's how I'm choosing to say Ashley's last name. Ashley, reach out if that's not how you say your last name. But she wrote this article called Black Christmas and the Horror of Being Female in a Patriarchal Society. Yeah. And like, yeah, that's pretty much it, right? I also went to Ashley Manu's website, and in her little bio, she says writer, Gemini. Which I thought you'd like.
Yes. Snaps for Ashley.
Yeah. And Manu starts by like with a personal anecdote, which is really interesting, and ends up posing like a really important question that like when women are the targets of violence in horror films, it kind of goes back to our talk of exploitation films. Like, is that feminist or exploitative?
Right.
You know?
Because we're watching these women be brutalized and stuff.
Because on the one hand, females and women as the main characters and like things within the horror genre do make it more feminist because we're like getting a female point of view.
Right, and often there's at least one who's like ends up becoming really badass and like taking back control.
Yeah. But then, you know, the counterpoint to that is that like maybe the main characters are always girls because women make easy targets.
Yeah.
Right. So Ashley mentions, and I just really couldn't agree more, is like Black Christmas is a film that shows how a male-controlled culture makes it practically impossible for women to express their bodily autonomy, independence, and sexuality safely, even within their own homes.
Yeah.
Like Claire, Mrs. Mac, Barb, like they're just in the comfort of their own home.
Yeah.
And they're not even safe there. Right. The women of Pi Kappa Sigma, that's the name of their sorority, Pi Kappa Sigma, they're failed at every turn, which we already talked, like the cops, and also I would say the medical professionals, like the one who just sedates Jess.
Yeah,
and absolutely. Like, she doesn't need any more medical supervision.
Don't even worry about it.
She can just sleep it off in this house that may or may not solve a psycho killer.
Do you even know why she's unconscious right now? Like, does she have a head wound? Like, is she?
Yeah.
She have a concussion?
No.
What have you done for this woman?
Yep. They're just failed at every turn. Right.
God.
And it is a metaphor, a really good metaphor for how society in general, like, just turns a blind eye to the violence that happens against women.
Yeah.
Especially the violence that happens against women when society feels like women are not sufficiently controlled enough. Right. So that's really what I think, really what this movie's all about.
Right. Yeah.
And we see that again in like the A plot of the psycho killer killing these women in the comfort of their own sorority home. But also in the B plot of Jess trying to seek an abortion.
And I think one way that this film really like shows that this movie is about like misogyny in this larger way is in that way where we don't actually ever really see the killer.
Yeah. Because it doesn't matter.
Like we never learn about his backstory.
No.
It doesn't focus on him. So he can even be this symbol.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like a disembodied voice and like this one little shot of brown eye.
Yeah,
and
right.
it's so like, so he can represent so many men.
Yeah.
And misogyny in general. And like what do we know about him? He's like aggressive and like kind of distraught and like full of rage and violence. And like, yeah, that's what real life misogyny is.
Yeah.
And like sometimes it can be like kind of hard to see either because it gets dismissed by people, like it gets dismissed by all these cops, or because it's so pervasive.
Yeah.
It's like hard to imagine anything else. Like the girls don't really think too much about the phone calls at first because it's just sort of like
Part of their
lives, you know?
Yeah.
They don't think to like call the cops about it until it becomes this bigger thing because it's so pervasive.
Yeah. And Barb so nonchalantly saying that you can't rape a townie.
Right, yeah,
Right, yeah.
yeah. But in this like, and then meanwhile, this murderer is like lurking through the, like he's literally everywhere, just lurking around, like ever present in our society. Oh, the symbols, the themes, they're theming. And like, and like even the ways that he gets like kind of childish sometimes where like misogynistic men do. And like the way, and then on the other hand, it gets tinged with the sexual dominance the way it always does. And the way it's like aided by advancements in technology. Like I'm just thinking about how like the internet age has really helped stalkers in so many ways, you know? And so it's like, it's always there and you can't always see where it's coming from because it's like, oh, it's probably this controlling abusive boyfriend because why wouldn't it be? And like it is. But it's also the cops themselves.
Also, yeah.
And it's also the medical professional, like you said. And it's also like the actual killer. And it's like all these women being left to fend for themselves. And like.
And even Claire's dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even he's like kind of. Yeah. And it's like the fact that the story doesn't resolve like we were talking about.
Yeah.
And ends with Jess still in danger and maybe even dead. It's like, because even when you've dealt with this one abusive man.
Yeah.
There's always another man nearby with like an equal potential for violence.
Yeah. Yeah, because like these women are constantly dealing with men enforcing their will upon them. And so like again, why we like don't know who the psycho killer is because it doesn't really matter because it doesn't matter who it is or what even their motivation is.
Yeah.
It's just like it's
society, man.
Everywhere.
Yeah. And it's like we see it again in how like Peter and our psycho killer, Billy, whatever we want to call him, they're like kind of the same monster in a lot of ways. Not just in the way that Peter's like this red herring for him.
Right.
But like they're both figures of this like very real harm that these women are facing. Yeah. And it's like they both have this violence directed outwards towards the women and around them. Yeah. And these women have done nothing but like kind of exist fully as like autonomous people.
Yeah.
And like
trying to pursue higher education.
Both Peter and the caller, they just need Jess's attention. They like just need women's attention and they're going to throw fucking fits if they don't get it. And when things don't go their way, like whenever they feel out of control, they like lash out in these different violent ways. Yeah. And so it's like, even though the only actual like violence we see Peter do is against like objects like the piano or the Christmas ornaments. It's like you can see the line from that to the killer.
Yeah, because it's still like an intimidation technique. You know,
so in like that way you can kind of see why the A plot and the B plot about the abortion line are really kind of the same plot.
They really are. Yeah.
And do you want to talk more about abortion?
I do, yeah. So yeah, like I was saying, we were talking about this off mic, is that I spent like an hour looking into the history of abortion access in the United States until I realized / remembered that this film is Canadian.
Yeah, I didn't even know this movie was Canadian.
This film is technically Canadian, and I would never say that Canada and the United States are the same thing. Right. I would never say that. We're very different countries. Yeah. But we do have a lot of similarities in culturally, right?
Yeah.
So basically, it seemed like before, as far as Canada is concerned, pre-1968, abortion was pretty much illegal and incredibly difficult to access safely in Canada, right? And so I learned a little bit about the U.S. history, and it could probably be, extrapolated to Canada as well.
Because I imagine at least the cultural conversations going on were probably pretty similar.
Absolutely.
Or like it was a debate in the zeitgeist around the same time, probably in both countries.
So I just have a couple fun facts for us, although this is very much relevant to the United States, but oh well. So in 1847, doctors in the United States band together to form the AMA, the American Medical Association, which is a male-dominated authority on medical practices.
Oh, wow.
Where, and really kind of like one of the first things the AMA starts to do is scrutinize reproductive healthcare workers, like midwives and nurses.
Oh, yeah.
And
they have authority in a field that the men want to take.
Yeah, basically. And so...
That happened even in the Middle Ages when doctors first started to become a thing.
Yeah. Medicine, yeah.
Yeah, when medicine first started, yeah. That's
Yeah.
always been a thing where men are like, this is now our field, women get out.
Yeah,
and
like-
it's like, we've been practicing this for fucking centuries.
Yeah,
and
midwives and doulas have been like doing abortions, for like
we've
centuries.
got important information that we could maybe even work together on. And men are like, no,
there's nothing you could possibly teach us. Yeah. Right. So they're kind of phasing out those services that midwives and nurses provide, making it harder for them to legally perform those abortions. And meanwhile, the AMA is composed of physicians who lack expertise of pregnancy and reproductive health. Oh, God. By 1910, I'm jumping ahead quite a few years here. By 1910, abortion is outright illegal in every state in the Union, at every stage of pregnancy. There were some exceptions in the instance of saving a patient's life, right? But the decision, who gets to decide if you're actually saving your patient, if an abortion will save a person's life, is the doctor. In 1910 in the United States, 95% of which were men.
Right. Of course.
And then all of our listeners have been wondering, but when does the racism come in?
I was going to say, were those also white men?
It comes in right here. So, because by the early 1900s, early 20th century, the U.S. is experiencing a lot of increased migration and immigration, rather, excuse me. And politicians and other citizens are like worried about there basically being less white people, and so like really cracking down on access to abortion specifically for upper class white women, wanting them to have more kids. But see, here's the thing is that upper class people will always be able to access abortion.
Right. Yeah.
They can go fuck off to Sweden for, a couple of weeks and have a nice vacation and get an abortion there. Like that's just not how it works. And then we really start to see the consequences of these practices by the 30s, because making abortion illegal doesn't keep people from having abortions. It just keeps them from having safe abortions.
Of course.
So we do really start to see by the 1930s, like a lot of unsafe and illegal abortions, killing thousands of women. Right. Yeah. So, and then of course, also just like generally the stigma around abortion in general, which is also a huge, huge aspect of it. Right. Oh, yeah. And then by the 1960s, at least the early 1960s, we also have a lot of pregnant women experiencing birth defects from taking thalidomide.
Oh.
Yeah. So you know what thalidomide is?
Not really.
Okay, yeah. So it was basically just like an anti-nausea drug. It was basically supposed to like take care of like the symptoms of being pregnant.
Right, the morning sickness.
Morning sickness and all that stuff. But it caused pretty severe birth defects. And so I think once... and people were taking thalidomide through like the 50s and 60s. And I think like by the early 60s, they started to really realize that,
this is actually an issue.
The thalidomide is causing really severe birth defects. That was kind of the things that then women in the 60s who were just like, wait a minute, I'm pregnant and I've taken thalidomide, wanting basically the thalidomide fallout kind of brings a greater support for like abortion law reform, basically. Things kind of happen until then. In 1964, there is some abortion law reform. Something the ASA is created, which stands for the Association for the Study of Abortion. which is cool. And they're kind of like strategically, incrementally trying to increase abortion access. This is where they're advocating for those, quote unquote, medically necessary abortions, right? And I think it kind of seems like their long-term plan was to put larger abortion reform laws in place, but they're like, we got to start small, right? And then in 1968 is when the Canadian federal government passes the Criminal Law Amendment Act, which helps legalize abortion and contraception as well. It's not technically until the 1980s that Canada's Supreme Court enshrines the right, like reproductive health care, reproductive rights. In their constitution. And then in 1973, stateside, that's when we get Roe versus Wade, which is where the U.S. Supreme Court rules that the due process clause of the 14th Amendment in the Constitution protects the right to abortion. In particular, the Supreme Court recognized that for the first time, the constitutional right to privacy is broad enough to encompass a woman's decision whether or not to terminate a pregnancy.
Yeah.
Roe versus Wade protected the right to abortion in all 50 states, making abortion services safer and more accessible throughout the country. The decision also set a legal precedent that affected dozens of subsequent Supreme Court cases.
And I think also taught us a lesson about relying on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, right.
To do anything for us.
To do anything, yes.
Okay, Roe v. Wade, but then what?
Right. So this history, the U.S. history and the Canadian history does inform our world as the viewers of this film, right?
Yeah.
But also the world that Jess is living in as she chooses to get an abortion. And this is honestly how I feel, and I don't think this is a new thought, but this is my deep thought, is that the history of abortion access is just so deeply rooted in trying to control women's bodies and controlling their reproductive freedom. And I think, to me, obviously, there's, I think, a big part of the abortion debate, quote unquote debate, right, is that we don't really have a full understanding of when a life becomes a life, right? It's just when is that person actually a person, blah, blah, blah. And for some people, that's a big aspect of it, especially I think for people who are very religious, you know? But really, I think a huge part of the restriction of access to reproductive health care is just the fact that women actually have a significant amount of power in our bodies. And the fact is just women, biological females, whatever you want to say, are the ones who get pregnant and do have to carry the vast majority of the burden to procreate. And so when they have access to more choices to maybe not do that, it scares the fuck out of the patriarchy.
Right. Yeah. It makes it feel like something is being taken away from the men.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Women. Yeah, actually, we really do have a very significant amount of power within our bodies and the choices that we get to make within our bodies, and restricting the choices women are allowed to make with their bodies is just part of patriarchy.
And I think it also is about like what Peter says in this movie, where he's this is fine. I'm leaving the conservatory. We're going to get married. And Jess is I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing. Yeah. And I think that's also
I don't want to marry you.
The abortion restrictions is well, if women have kids, it becomes harder for them to work.
Yep.
Pregnancy takes a big toll on their bodies. Yeah. That makes it harder to work. It just makes it harder for them to have their own independence outside of the home. Yeah. Peter really wants Jess to just sort of be encased in whatever home he is imagining for them. Yeah. And Jess is no, I am my own independent person. I'm going to go out there and do what I already said I was going to do.
And just follow along, just be well, okay, so here's the plan now. Yeah. For I, Peter, have made the plan for both of us. Aren't I so generous, right?
Right, yeah.
And then when Jess is no, I'm not going to marry you. I'm not having this baby.
I was clear when we first met that this is my goals for my life.
And you might have changed, and that's fine, but I haven't. So
see ya.
Yeah, and then he gets really, really, really upset.
God.
Yeah.
And blows his fucking piano recital. Take that, bitch.
Fucking guy, yeah. Yeah, but also, talk about selfish, right? I can't believe you're bringing this to me right now. You know how important this afternoon is to me. And then, and also we already talked about it, breaking into the basement of this house. It's just it's locked. Jess saw you and isn't going to open the door for you. So you break a window?
I mean, I guess the only way I can see it from his perspective is that he heard her like screaming or whatever and thought that she was in danger.
Maybe.
But she is clearly there looking scared at
him.
you.
Yeah.
Like, but men either don't see it when women are afraid of them or like it.
Yeah. Or don't care.
Or don't care.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it's just such a thing.
Fucking Peter. I'm happy that Jess gets to kill him.
I am too.
Yeah.
That was in my notes too. I was like, I don't care that he's not the psycho killer or whatever. Fuck that guy.
Right. It's like we
and you know what? He was trespassing.
It reminds me of our Midsommar episode where, it's just like, this is not proportional punishment.
For what?
Christian is not receiving proportional punishment for his crimes being burned alive. And it's like, but isn't he though? Isn't it proportional? Anyway. So I also, because after we finished watching Black Christmas, I couldn't help but like, I know that there are so many horror movies that take place specifically at a sorority house or just on a college campus more generally. And I was like, what's up with that? Right. And honestly, I tried to look into it. I was like, why are horror movies set in sorority houses? And I just basically got listicles.
Yeah.
Of like all these horror movies that take place in a sorority house. I'm like, yeah, but why?
I know.
Why
I'm so tired of the listicles.
Yeah.
The internet is dead.
Yeah. So I found a really great article at bestcolleges.com. I know, right? By Genevieve Carlton. She's got a PhD in history, so I trust her.
I trust her.
But this is a history of women in higher education, again, specifically in the United States. So just found some really interesting stuff that I think you'll really like. Basically, in the Western world where there is that organized education, like a college or a university, women were effectively banned from being enrolled in college or any other kind of degree earning program until basically the 19th century. And even then, it wasn't even really.
Yeah, the education they got was not the same.
So like single sex education and like educating women and girls, right? It was kind of rooted in the idea that women didn't need a degree. They needed to learn certain skills that were socially acceptable for them, right? So the skills they needed to be a homemaker, a mother, maybe a governess, a domestic servant, something like that, right?
Yeah. And skills that made them look good on the marriage market.
To get their MRS, yep. These gender norms effectively exclude women from higher education for centuries, right?
Yeah.
And so I did not know, I learned this, that in 1836, Wesleyan becomes the first women's college in the world.
Damn.
Yeah. And then those, what we call the Seven Sisters, the like kind of female Ivy League, whatever, kind of start to open up over the next few decades. So yeah, that's the other thing is that like in the 19th century, women's role in higher education doesn't really get going until the 20th century. But in the 19th century, what we get is like kind of two paths. We see women's colleges, right, of which you and I are both alumna of.
Yeah.
Which I think
opened in 1854, I believe.
Yep. Before the University of Oregon. Yep. So obviously we have a little bit of bias here. That women's colleges in general, like a specific place for women to be educated or co-educational programs, right? And so I love this quote. It says, nevertheless, even women's colleges treated higher education for women as dangerous experiments, according to historian Ellen Horowitz. Colleges for men modeled their campuses on like an academic village, right? Where men slept in the dorms and crossed the quad to go to their villages, whatever. Whereas like women's colleges worked a lot more like a seminary where like female students are living and studying in one building, right? Basically like this architectural choice to keep them in one place to keep women from quote unquote losing their virtue.
Well, it was like that. Mills was originally just Mills Hall.
Yeah, it was just Mills Hall and the women lived there and studied there. Absolutely.
The loop, they would drive up in their carriage to get dropped off.
Yep. Oh, this is great. You're going to love this. So in 1837, Oberlin opens its doors to all students. It's like one of the first universities to go co-ed. And they end up including women and people of color, which is pretty good for Oberlin. However, don't get too excited about Oberlin just yet, because I got something for you here. The year Oberlin first began admitting women, female students were dismissed from their Monday classes so that they could do the male students' laundry.
No!
Yeah. I know.
That's so gross.
So it seems pretty similar for women trying to gain higher education in Canada. It doesn't really seem like they went so much to the direction of women's colleges. I think they went more the direction of making their colleges co-ed. But again, this is like in the context of this film and like the world that this film is taking place in and the world that these characters exist in, right? They technically have a protected right to reproductive freedom, and they have access to quality higher education, right? And of course there's it's cost prohibitive, right? Again, as second wave feminism, we're not really
classist,
we're not taking into account the intersectionality of race, class, and sexuality. So even though they have the protected right of reproductive freedom and access to higher education, they still are faced with like these crushing double standards in this patriarchal society. And again, what could be more terrifying than existing as a woman in a patriarchal society where like the cops don't give a fuck about you if you go missing? You probably just ran off with your boyfriend.
Yeah.
You know, the doctor's just going to sedate you after you've suffered a terrible trauma.
Yeah.
And I do think death of several of your friends.
I do think it's interesting that even in this movie that is clearly like whether intentional or not has this kind of like really feminist message.
It really does.
And shows these women as like full characters. Yeah. The only person who we like actually know what they're studying is Peter. We don't know what any of these women are studying.
This is true. Yeah.
Like, what are Jess's plans for the future?
Yeah, she said that she's talked about them and that's what she wants. But
like, that's cool. And it's cool that we know that all of these women are college students, but we don't actually care about what they're learning. And like, sure, it's because this is like the off season. They're on break.
Christmas break, yeah.
But like, still, what are they there for? Yeah. What are her plans?
Yeah.
So like, even in this movie that's like dealing with these things, still can't actually quite conceptualize women as like scholars.
Yeah, but like, what are you studying? Right?
As like learners.
Yeah, what are they studying?
Yeah. Or are they just there to have sex and drink?
Right. On their parents' dime.
Yeah.
Right.
Like Claire's dad thinks.
And try and find a husband or something.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I do actually have one, though, just going back to your original question about like why horror movies in sororities.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think it's similar to one of the theories that I have, or at least that I saw other people having, about why like murders at Christmas time,
right?
Or during the holidays,
yeah.
Which is that like it's a good reason to get people together in a confined space and to like limit the pool of who could be the suspects.
Fair.
If we're all together in the sorority house.
Right, yeah, we have one central location, which is, again, an aspect of a slasher.
So, so there's an extent to which it is just sort of like a literary convenience.
Truly, yeah.
In the same way that, like, home invasions, when it's all in the home, like, it's like that same sort of thing.
And taking place in a sorority, like, hits both of those, right? It's like, it's like a home.
Yeah.
And we've got, literary convenience of all of our characters being in one central location. Yeah.
Yeah, and double extra good because they're hot young women who we love to see get murdered.
Who may or may not be sexually active.
Yes.
Yeah. Who we love to see get murdered. Yep.
Okay. So then, the only other thing we haven't really talked about with this movie is that it's literally called Black Christmas.
Right. This is our December episode for Christmas.
For Christmas.
Yep. The movie's called Black Christmas.
So, like, what's the deal with Christmas horror?
Right, because like I mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of neither here nor there that it takes place at Christmas.
Yeah.
Like, it could take place at the end of the school year in late spring, early summer.
Right, yeah.
Because the whole point is that, like, people are leaving. It's less densely populated as it usually is when the school year is in full swing. So why Christmas?
Yeah, could have been spring break. Yeah. That's another great time for wild things to happen. And I definitely had some theories, not just for this film, but like in general, why there are so many. Because this isn't the only Christmas horror movie. I'm sure you could name.
Oh my gosh, there's so freaking many.
I'm sure you could name a ton right now.
Krampus is really good.
Yeah.
Violent Night came out last year. That one's really good.
Came out.
It is violent. Silent Night with Keira Knightley. Better Watch Out. Again, and like some of them, the point is that they're Christmas themed. But so many of them
are just at
like
Christmas.
Better Watch Out. It's just like, this doesn't need to be a Christmas movie.
It just
could be whenever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So before we get into my theories about why that is,
Yeah.
we're going to lay some groundwork
Okay.
with the history of Christmas a little bit.
Sure.
Not too much,
a
but
long
like the dark parts. Because
Is this like once Christmas has been thoroughly paganized?
well, yeah, there's definitely, because I think we all, maybe not all, I shouldn't assume things, but like a lot of people know that Santa Claus comes from like Santa Claus as a figure comes from these like kind of notoriously dark and like wild pagan roots.
And Violent Night gets into that.
Yeah,
It's really good. Violent
cool.
Night's really good. Next December, let's
do that one.
do that one. Yeah.
That one does look good.
Yeah.
Because there are a number of like pagan figures, folklore figures, mythological figures who were sort of combined with Saint Nicholas, our very Christian figure, to form our modern understanding of Santa Claus, which you're nodding along because you know all these things.
And I think also Coca-Cola
yeah,
informs our modern idea of Santa Claus as well.
that is true. That is true as well. Yeah.
Anyway.
But to keep to the darker stuff,
Yeah,
the reason
yeah.
why I think Christmas
Oh.
becomes horror.
Capitalism is very dark. Anyway. Yes. Anyway.
Yes, we will get into the Industrial Revolution. Just wait.
Neither industrial nor a revolution.
Yeah. But starting off, like Germanic peoples celebrated a lot of Midwestern festivals.
We talking
for
Goths? We
Yule.
talking Celts?
All over the place,
All of 'em.
man.
Okay.
But like right now we're talking about Yule celebrations.
Sure. Yeah.
Which depending on where you were could include the Wild Hunt, which I don't know if you're familiar with. It's often led by Woden, so like Odin when it becomes Norse, that same sort of like god, father, deity figure, right? And it's literally a hunt where he's like leading his pack of often like undead, like spirits, ghosts, things like that, and often wolves or even like werewolves, depending on if the mythology for that existed in that area.
Right.
And like it's either like a bad sign if you see it, that means something bad's gonna happen, or there are lots of stories about getting caught up in it and either having to hunt or being hunted or being taken away to like fae type situations. The Wild Hunt gets involved in all of that fae stuff.
Oh, yeah. You got to be careful with the fae. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another early, still kind of Germanic area is Belsnickel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which he wore furs and this like mask with a long tongue, which is already just kind of terrifying.
It is, yeah.
But he has that idea of like, the call versus the presence.
Yes.
Only he'd be like, I will beat the naughty children with a switch.
Yes.
And to give cake and sweets to the other children.
Have you been impish or admirable? Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, these are all sort of like the, quote unquote wild man sort of folktale figures. And both the Wild Hunt and Belsnickel, they're both representations of like chaos and like fertility and sexuality.
Always.
But like untamed nature and like fur of the beast and rawr. But also some of their traits became part of Santa Claus, like Odin's long white beard.
Yeah.
Yeah, Belsnickel's furred outfit. That's why Santa Claus has his fur, you know? And so like they sort of are refigured during Christianization to become a part of Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And then there's also, once we have Saint Nick, a lot of his like companions where like he would do the good side and do nice things for good children.
Yeah.
And then he would have his darker companions with him, like Black Pete, like Krampus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like people who would like either like listen through the chimneys. That's where the chimneys come in. They would listen through to hear if they were being bad. Yeah. Or like Krampus is literally like a devilish creature. He's got like horns and shit, and they would like hurt children or like kidnap them.
Yeah.
Like it's literally terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and I think those serve a function to like keep kids in line.
Right. Yeah. And I think also, even now that we've sort of moved on from that and just have it all combined into this one Santa Claus figure, I'm not the first person to point out that Santa Claus himself is like kind of terrifying. Because it's like
He knows when you're sleeping and when you're awake.
he's invading your home.
He knows if you've been bad or good.
Right, yeah. He's
What's
like
Santa's
deciding your
definition
fate.
of good or bad?
Yeah. And it's like these are all things that like a psycho killer does
Truly.
in these slashers.
Yeah.
They creep into your home.
Yeah.
They decide if you're good or bad and they're going to kill you for it, if you're the virgin or the whore.
Yeah.
They're watching you, they're stalking you.
Yeah.
Like Santa Claus is like one bead removed from a psycho killer.
Truly. Except he brings presents.
Yeah.
And eats your cookies.
But only by the grace of God, man.
Right, yeah. Heaven forbid you get Krampus instead. Yeah,
right?
Totally.
Yeah. And then, okay, so then there is this fact that we have this Christmas stuff happening, but thanks to the Puritans, Christmas kind of died down for a while.
Oh,
like,
Cromwell.
Yeah, he tried. He like banned Christmas
in the United Kingdom.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
But there are a lot of things like Puritans in America being like, we don't want all this frivolous shit.
Yeah.
And it became a thing for a while where like it used to be like those 12 days of Christmas where you would celebrate all of them, and then it became like you'll have a nice church service and that'll be good enough. And then also Industrial Revolution, where you're fucking working, you'll get like one day off from work to celebrate Christmas. You're not going to have time for all those 12 days. And you're definitely not going to have time to go visit your family.
And you might not even get Christmas. You'll probably get Boxing Day. You'll get the day after. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and we genuinely have Charles Dickens to thank for a lot of our modern Christmas traditions.
I knew that. Yeah.
And it wasn't just A Christmas Carol, because that was actually his 4th Christmas story.
Jesus.
And then he went on to write 4 more.
Was he like, I don't know much about Charles Dickens as a person. Was he particularly religious or?
No, actually. So there are different reasons for his, in general, the early Victorian era started to see a resurgence in an interest in Christmas. And some of that was actually because of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert.
Loved Christmas?
Well, her mother and one of her grandmothers were German. Oh, okay. And so that's actually where the like Christmas tree started to become popular, because they brought it over from Germany and Queen Victoria used it, and her and Prince Albert would actually start to have these like family gatherings for Christmas around the Christmas tree. And so all the journals would like write about it, and like the newspapers, it'd be like a big deal going on.
So if the Queen's doing it, then other people probably want to
do it. Yeah. And then you have the Charles Dickens side, where Industrial Revolution, he's seeing that the way Christmas has been done isn't really working anymore. And there were other people who had written about Christmas before that and like some of the older traditions of it, and he was like, well, what can we do for traditions now? And he really sort of made it a little bit more secular, and also just sort of like a little bit easier for the common worker to do. So that's why it's more of like what our modern Christmas is, where it's more about getting together with your family. It's not like these big feasts and like huge 12 days occasion, and you like don't necessarily need to go to church. You just need to be with your family.
Yeah.
Which is what we see in A Christmas Carol.
Or else ghosts will haunt you.
Well, yeah. Yeah. And I think there's another aspect also that we need to point out. I'll get to the ghost in a second. Okay. But I'm not done with Charles Dickens, because the other thing to point out is that he wrote for money.
Of course.
He made his money through his writing.
Yeah.
And so you have to think, okay, there was already a resurgence in interest in Christmas.
Yeah.
Something he was contributing to. He wrote Christmas stories. People liked them.
Yeah.
They bought, they read them.
Yeah.
That incentivizes him to write more.
Yeah.
People get even more interested in Christmas because they're reading about it more. It becomes this loop. Other writers are like, oh, this Christmas thing is pretty fucking big.
Yeah.
Let's all keep writing about Christmas. And it keeps happening. And so I could see like Black Christmas comes out.
Yeah.
It does pretty well.
Yeah.
People like it. Yeah. In both Canada and in America, in the US.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, you're kind of incentivized to do not just other like holiday themed ones like Halloween, but then also other Christmas themed.
Yeah.
Like it becomes incentivized to do it because people want it. Because somebody did it.
There's a demand for it.
Yeah.
And there's money to be made, so you might as well be the supply.
Yeah.
If your job is professional writer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, as you point out, significantly, A Christmas Carol features some ghosts.
Ghosts. 4, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And they aren't, some of them are meant to be more frightening than others.
This is true. Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily say that it's at all a horror,
Yeah.
But it does link Christmas to like the specter of death, which is its own terrifying. He sees his own grave and stuff, like there are horror, terrifying elements. And like to return to those Yule celebrations from way back in the pagan days, lots of early winter celebrations were about acknowledging the ends of cycles.
Yeah.
Which
it's
automatically
the end of the year.
Yeah. Which means you're then going to ruminate about death.
Yeah.
Because that's the end of a cycle.
Yeah.
And like it was also a lot of different cultures considered that the veil or whatever you want to call it between the living and the dead was weaker during all of those dark months of winter.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so Christmas actually for a really long time, even before Dickens, was a time for telling ghost stories. And like stories in general, it was a time for sitting around, especially pre-writing. You would tell stories when you gathered and you would gather in the winter.
Yeah.
And so you would tell ghost stories among other stories. And like, I think Dickens helped bring that back as well as part of the traditions that he was bringing in. And so it's like following him, we had like J.H. Riddell, Algernon Blackwood, A.M. Barrage, like they're all writing these Christmas ghost stories, and they're starting to get a little bit creepier with what the ghost is doing. You know, and the Christmas part maybe isn't as relevant as it is in A Christmas Carol. They're like Christmas ghost stories.
Yeah.
You know? And I think what's interesting, a sort of similar thing that happens, I was listening to this podcast called She Done It, which is about like the golden age of murder mysteries and like detective fiction.
Oh, okay.
And
like Agatha Christie.
Yeah, exactly like Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
Basically all those writers sort of like between the First and Second World Wars. And they were fucking full of Christmas mysteries. Wow. Like murders and then other types of mysteries as well. So yeah, Agatha Christie has the Christmas murders. I think Poirot's Christmas. Poirot, however you say his goddamn name. Poirot. I can't do it.
Pero, it's French, dude. I don't know.
It's not. It's Belgian. He would be offended.
Oh, and I think there were a lot of French people who would also be offended. I confused a Frenchman with a Belgian.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Yeah. But then there was also like...
all the Frenchmen and the Belgians.
Yeah. Dorothy L. Sayers has some. Niall Marsh. Like all sorts of mystery writers have their murders in the middle of the holidays. And the host of the podcast, She Done It, has this whole episode about it called Crime at Christmas. And Carolyn Crampton's her name. She points out that Christmas is a convenient and plausible reason for a novelist to gather characters together in one place, just like we were talking about with the sorority, including those who don't like each other very much. But feel some kind of duty to be present for the celebrations.
Having just had Thanksgiving with my family.
It rings true.
It rings real true. Yeah.
And then she also says the festive season can also escalate existing tensions or cause hidden secrets to be revealed, which can result in a tragedy. And I think that's as true for horror and like slashers as it is for like murder mysteries. Yeah. So all of that history, I think I have a few different reasons for why horror really resonates with Christmas.
Yeah.
One is just sort of like in general that kind of like juxtaposition between the light and the darkness.
Right.
Which is really what winter holidays are about.
Yeah. It's also with Hanukkah as well. It's like all about it's dark and like bringing in the light.
Yeah. Right now it's already dark outside and you've got your little Christmas lights up, making a little Christmas tree, bringing some light in.
Yep.
So like we all have always kind of known that winter is dark and kind of scary. Yeah. And it's like it's a time when food less plentiful.
Scarce. Yeah.
Light is less plentiful. And like we try to cover that all up with like brightness and feasts and things. And so I think horror at Christmas can be kind of like a catharsis where we can kind of release. It's like a way to focus in on that darkness for a moment and then put it down again and feel safe in our light.
Yeah, and I think also especially the fact that like it's, that it's the end of the cycle, it's the end of the year, right? And so, the kind of something old ending and dying for like this new thing to start again. Yeah. Yeah,
and I think that's also something about how like why people talk about like why we like horror in general.
Right.
It can make us feel kind of weirdly safe.
Yeah.
To sort of have that distance to it and sort of be able to watch it. And sometimes because it can make death look kind of silly and easier to handle in a weird way because it's like so over the top.
Yeah.
And like I think Christmas as a season is also so over the top.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And can be hard to like these film scholars Chris Vanderkay and Kathleen Fernandez Vanderkay have actually written a lot about Christmas horror, well like genre horror and stuff, and really just sort of pointed out the simple fact that like horror loves irony.
We do love irony.
Yeah. And so, like, this is a time that's supposed to be about, like, charity and warmth.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, it can be, like, cold and lonely and sad. And so, like, horror can maybe allow us to process those darker feelings.
Yeah, you don't need to feel guilty about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, like, it can even be, like, kind of like a welcome respite from all of that holiday cheer.
Yeah,
to be like, no, I want to feel, like, scared, or I want to feel sad, or I want to feel whatever. I don't want to
see a sorority girl get strangled to death.
Yeah. Also, just sort of like what we talked about in our Purge episode, how sometimes horror is kind of like easy junk food.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot in Christmas and like around the holidays that is pulling your attention all the which ways, which I think is why there's a lot of movies around this time that are like the fluffy Hallmark Christmas movies, or like things that are really formulaic and you know what's going to happen and you just sort of watch it and you can watch it with your family.
Right.
And it's just sort of like easy entertainment.
Yeah, it's not particularly controversial. You can watch it with those family members you maybe don't actually like that much.
Right, yeah. And you like don't really have to talk too much other than about the movie.
Yeah.
And that like gives you an easy thing to talk about.
Yeah.
the author of something called A Scary Little Christmas, A History of Yuletide Horror Film, 1972 to 2022, 2020, Matthew Dupuy.
Okay.
He talks about how Christmas creates this like quick emotional connection to the story.
Sure. Because everybody has an emotional connection to Christmas.
Yeah, and you
positive or negative.
You automatically have a reason to like care about what's going on because you're like, oh well, their holiday is getting ruined.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
like
it's Christmas.
Yeah. And yeah, he says holiday horror films, especially the better ones, maximize the social intimacy of the viewer and turn everything we love about the holiday on its head, creating that perfect backdrop for dread and terror.
Yeah.
And I think there's also something about the way that like things that we're really familiar with can then be subverted to become really terrifying, and like the known becomes unknown. And I think when it, like, especially secular Westerners,
right,
Americans, US, UK, you know, we can kind of sometimes feel without a specific culture sometimes, but we have Christmas. Like, even if we don't celebrate Christmas, it is so in our culture. Right. We all know Christmas trees, Santa, candy canes.
Like, the kids get a couple weeks off of school.
Yeah. And for the longest time, it was called Christmas break. We've now switched to winter break.
Yeah, right.
Because not everybody celebrates it. But it's like, these are so visible, like well-known touchstones that we can all recognize just from living here.
Yeah.
That we have that familiar thing. And then we have that familiar thing shifted a little bit to become scary.
Right. It kind of makes me think of like a summer camp, right? And like all those other ways that we frame like a slasher film or any other kind of horror genre film, of like what emotional connection already exists for the audience that we can exploit and make scary. Right?
Yeah.
And not everybody's gone to summer camp, and that's fine. You know,
right, yeah.
But like those kinds of experiences that like are even though they're different individually, they do kind of like universally connect us. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think even though like kind of on the surface it seems sort of like silly or something that there are so many Christmas horror movies, because you don't really think of Christmas as like a scary time.
Right.
Like, I think it actually, when you think about it and its history and all of these things and the psychology of it all, it's like, no, it actually makes perfect sense. Like, even more so than like Halloween horror, which honestly isn't capitalized on that much. I think because it's already a spooky season.
It's spooky season, yeah.
You don't need that release in the way that you do during Christmas.
Right. Yeah, because it's just the whole thing. Yeah.
You know? I wouldn't be surprised if Christmas was like the most used holiday in horror. Valentine's Day.
Yeah. I don't know. That would be an interesting thing to look into for sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of Christmas horror movies. I mean, some are so bad, but yeah.
But like they just keep coming.
They just keep coming. Yeah. Well, now I'm hoping that we'll be getting a Thanksgiving franchise. So
fingers crossed.
Because honestly, Thanksgiving is a terrifying holiday.
It is. And it should not. Yeah. And I know what you did last summer. Try to give us a 4th of July.
That's true. A 4th of July movie.
I feel like there's got to be some Valentine's Day ones.
Just My Bloody Valentine is a big one. There's some anthology horror. Oh, fuck. I can't remember exactly. It's something about the holidays, and it's like literally, it's an anthology, and like there's a bunch of holidays, and Valentine's Day is absolutely one of them. Yeah.
I don't know. None of them hit like Christmas.
No, they really, really don't.
The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, yeah. Because that's good for Halloween and Christmas.
Double.
Yeah, so Katie, you and I are like, usually we play a game. What game do we want to play? And we're like, I don't know, archetypes maybe? And then we started recording and we're like, oh, well, here we are.
I think Archetypes is an interesting game for this movie because it is a slasher.
It's a slasher.
It's a proto-slasher.
Yeah. So, I mean, okay, so let's think about the character. We got Jess.
Yeah.
We've got Claire.
Barb.
We've got Barb. We've got Phil.
We've got Peter.
We've got, I mean, there's Mrs. Mack. There's Claire's dad.
There's the cop.
There's the cop. Maybe let's keep it to those. I like those 5.
The 4 sorority girls that we know. And Peter.
Yeah, so Phil, Jess, Claire, Barb, Peter.
Yes.
Okay. So, again, it's very interesting to me because, you know, Claire is teased as being a, you know, quote unquote professional virgin and dies first.
Right.
Which is so...
And obviously has these depths that are a little more sexual.
Yeah, right. She's got that free love poster on her bedroom wall. Right.
And meanwhile, Barb has that very stereotypical kind of like whore billing.
Yeah, she's smoking, she's drinking.
But she never talks about boys or seems to have
she
any
doesn't
connection.
seem
She
to
makes
have a
that
boyfriend.
fellatio joke to the cops.
And that's it. Just
And she, like-
just because she's college educated, know what fellatio is.
Right, yeah. And then she, like, talking back at the moaner. But
Yeah.
she doesn't really actually seem that...
Calling him a fucking pig, but it's not.
Yeah, she doesn't seem to have a lot of, like, personal sexuality going on, which is interesting.
Not really. Yeah. So, So then does that make Claire the whore?
Let's start with easier ones.
Let's start with an easier one.
Who do we think is the fool? Because I feel like it either has to be Mrs. Mac or Barb because they're the ones who are really imbibing.
That's true. So if Mrs. Mac is not in our 5,
Right.
then Barb as a fool makes sense, right?
Right.
Yes, yeah. Because she is kind of making light of the situation.
Right. And she has a lot of comedic lines.
And then she does have
or
that-
lines we're supposed to think are comedic.
Apparently, yeah. Maybe in 1974 they were hilarious. I don't know what to say.
Haha, townie.
Does anyone even still use that term
I don't
anymore?
know.
Well, because technically, because we live in Eugene.
Oh, we're townies.
We're townies.
This is a college school.
Yeah. I don't know
That's
what
really
to
funny.
I don't know.
I've never identified as a townie before,
No.
but townies never do.
This is true. Yeah. Yeah. I don't mind. I can be a townie. I don't care.
So yeah, Barb is our fool.
Barb's a fool. Yeah. But she does, also kind of have that breakthrough of just like, I think I really fucked up here,
Yeah.
Like, does she say anything that's like, the way that fools sometimes
often
do
have
speak
that
the
prophetic
truth?
sort of speaking
does
the
she ever
truth?
do or say anything that's like...
The closest thing I can think of, I mean, maybe when she talks about how she feels like it's her fault that she chased Claire off, so if she's dead, it's like her fault. But like, that's not true.
No, that's not true.
But it is like a prophetic in the sense that she like seems the most sure that Claire is dead.
That Claire's not okay. Yeah. Also, I think maybe when she has her asthma attack when she goes to bed.
Yeah.
And she's like, I had a dream there was a man in my room.
Oh,
Yeah, and
yeah.
it's like, because a man was in your room,
Yeah.
Barb. And then she makes some joke about like, oh, I could be so lucky to have a strange man in my room. Like, Barb,
don't say that.
we need to have some talks, Barb.
Yeah. Classic fool behavior.
I understand she's trying to be sexually liberated, but man, she's got a lot to learn about sex.
Yeah.
So, okay, Barb's
yeah.
our fool. Love that.
Does Peter athlete
Oh,
vibes?
Peter.
Which is, I don't know. I don't tend to think of
I almost
pianists
wonder
as
if he's our
athletes.
scholar because again, we don't know what anyone else is studying.
That's a good point, and that's like a big part of his character is that he is a college guy.
Right. And he's like at the conservatory.
Yeah.
And it almost like, to me, it seems like maybe Peter's a bit older because like
Yeah.
Jess seems like an undergrad, like her getting a bachelor's degree maybe.
Alternatively,
Yeah.
speaking of scholars,
Yeah.
Jess.
Yeah.
Because I feel like another thing scholars do is they try to think of things rationally, and
True.
they don't tend to be like particularly emotional characters.
That's true.
Sometimes to their detriment.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe Jess has those vibes, and even though we don't know what her plans are, she's sticking to them.
She's sticking to them.
She's like,
she has
I'm going
plans.
to, yeah, I am here for school. It's
She's
like
got
you, Peter.
dreams.
Whereas
Yeah.
Peter's like ready to throw away his school plans.
Yeah. After, that's right. Because he does make a mention of, I'm sick of, like, he's been living in one room for 8 years,
Yeah.
he says. And it's just like, okay, so you're like pursuing an advanced degree in this conservatory, right?
Yeah, you are like a professional pianist sort of
Yeah.
track.
Wanted to be he could still be a concert pianist anyway.
Fuck that guy.
I like that Jess is the scholar, right?
Yeah.
And then I like that because like then the scholar gets to be our final girl.
Which is rare.
Right?
I like that.
Because she's not a virgin.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. It's like
But none of
them really
It's hard to
are?
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hard to say, not really spelled out for us.
But yeah. I think she works as a scholar just for
Okay.
how like she thinks about things logically. And she's
Right.
like, these are the decisions I made based on thinking about it and coming to conclusions.
And also when other people start to get riled up, she does keep her cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
important. So then who's left?
So we still need an athlete for maybe Peter.
And a virgin and a whore.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay, so and then who's left? We got Peter,
Claire and
Claire
Phyllis.
and Phyllis.
It's so hard with Phyllis because we know literally
don't really
nothing
get to know much
about her.
About her. Could Peter be the whore?
We know he's sexually active.
This is true.
I do feel
What's
like
your criteria for a whore, though?
I mean, it does feel like it has to be somebody that the movie, to an extent, and definitely the slasher killer wants to punish. And that's Claire first.
That is Claire first. Yeah, I almost wonder if she kind of is our whore, even if she gets called a virgin.
I feel like the only reason not to put her in that spot is because she gets called a virgin, but like
she dies first. Usually that's the sign. Which again is why I feel like I think what you've brought up is really true, that Barb as a character actually seems really sexually liberated, but we don't actually know much about her sex life.
Yeah.
So like to me, again, as I mentioned
Barb
before,
is very like surface.
Yeah.
She talks tough.
Yeah.
And sexy. But
she talks the talk, but maybe doesn't walk the walk.
Yeah.
Yeah. That like in another version of this film, Barb would probably be one of the first to die.
Yeah.
Like she might be the one who like incurs the wrath of the psycho killer. Yeah. But it's not, it's Claire. And so,
Yeah, so I think she might be our whore.
I think Claire's the whore. Yeah. And then, so then
we just have our athlete
and our virgin.
Yeah.
Maybe Phyllis is the virgin.
I mean, she doesn't seem to have any sort of connection with anybody except for Jess.
Yeah, right. I think she might be the lesbian. Could we like make a...
Which, of course, a slasher killer would not consider true sex.
This is true. Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Yeah. So maybe... and she's like... She's pretty meek, pretty quiet.
Yeah. She's got her glasses.
A little bit more of a supportive character, I think. Yeah, maybe she's the virgin then.
Yeah.
But then that leaves
Peter... And she's one of the...
To be the athlete.
Except for Peter and Jess, Phil's the last to die.
Yeah, she does stick around. And I think she does get kind of cheated in her death, though.
She does. We don't even see it.
Yeah, we don't even see it. She's like, and Phyllis is dead too. And it's like,
but Jess loved her.
Yeah, but I loved her. I loved Phyllis.
Yeah. And I think Peter is the athlete just because the athletes do tend to be the violent, angry ones.
Yes, how much he acts.
Yeah, he broke into her basement, goddammit.
That's true. And
athletes are always the first ones to go into the basement.
I guess, yeah. Yeah, okay, that makes sense for me. Yeah, he's kind of the athlete. Yeah, he's definitely like... Even though he's a musician, right? We do see him like use his physicality.
He destroys his piano.
He does destroy that piano.
Move.
Yeah. He breaks the window.
He breaks the Christmas ornaments.
He does like use his physicality to like intimidate Jess.
Yeah. And then she fucking murders him.
Yeah. That's awesome. Love that for her. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So this has been Deep Thought Shallow Plots.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. We have an Instagram. At Deep Thought Shallow Plots.
Next time, we're going to watch Jeepers Creepers.
Yeah, we are. 2001 or
I don't know.
2000.
Literally the first horror movie I ever saw. Couldn't get through it.
Have you ever seen it all the way through?
Well, I finished it the next morning.
Oh, okay.
There was literally 10 minutes left and I couldn't do it.
In the daylight. You're like, I'm watching this in the daytime. That's fair. As always, thanks to sound guy Matt. And until next time, we'll get a man on it.